have more than once been read to the Socratic Club at Oxford, in which a contrast was drawn between a supposedly Christian attitude and a supposedly scientific attitude to belief. We have been told that the scientist thinks it his duty to proportion the strength of his belief exactly to the evidence, to believe less as there is less evidence, and to withdraw belief altogether when reliable adverse evidence turns up. We have been told that, on the contrary, the Christian regards it as positively praiseworthy to believe without evidence, or in excess of the evidence, or to maintain his belief unmodified in the teeth of steadily increasing evidence against it. Thus, a faith that has stood firm, which appears to mean a belief immune from all the assaults of reality, is commended. If this were a fair statement of the case, then the coexistence within the same species of such scientists and such Christians would be a very staggering phenomenon. The fact that the two classes appear to overlap, as they do, would be quite inexplicable. Certainly, all discussion between creatures so different would be hopeless. The purpose of this essay is to show that things are really not quite so bad as that. The sense in which scientists proportion their belief to the evidence, and the sense in which Christians do not, both need to be defined more closely. My hope is that when this has been done, though disagreement between the two parties may remain, they will not be left staring at one another in wholly dumb and desperate incomprehension. And first, a word about belief in general. I do not see that the state of proportioning belief to evidence is anything like so common in the scientific life as has been claimed. Scientists are mainly concerned not with believing things, but with finding things out. And no one, to the best of my knowledge, uses the word believe about things he has found out. The doctor says he believes a man was poisoned before he has examined the body. After the examination, he says the man was poisoned. No one says that he believes the multiplication table. No one who catches a thief red-handed says he believes that man was stealing. The scientist, when at work, that is, when he is a scientist, is laboring to escape from belief and unbelief into knowledge. Of course, he uses hypotheses or supposals. I do not think these are beliefs. We must look, then, for the scientist's behavior about belief, not to his scientific life, but to his leisure hours. In actual modern English usage, the verb believe, except for two special usages, generally expresses a very weak degree of opinion. Where is Tom? Gone to London, I believe. The speaker would be only mildly surprised if Tom had not gone to London after all. What was the date? 430 BC, I believe. The speaker means that he is far from sure. It is the same with the negative if it is put in the form, I believe not. Is Jones coming up this term? I believe not. But if the negative is put in a different form, it then becomes one of the special usages I mentioned a moment ago. This is, of course, the form, I don't believe it, or the still stronger, I don't believe you. I don't believe it is far stronger on the negative side than I believe is on the positive. Where is Mrs. Jones? Eloped with the butler. I believe. I don't believe it. This, especially if said with anger, may imply a conviction which in subjective certitude might be hard to distinguish from knowledge by experience. The other special usage is I believe, as uttered by a Christian. There is no great difficulty in making the hardened materialist understand, however little he approves, the sort of mental attitude which this "I believe" expresses. The materialist need only picture himself replying to some report of a miracle. "I don't believe it." And then imagine the same degree of conviction on the opposite side. He knows that he cannot there and then produce a refutation of the miracle which would have the certainty of mathematical demonstration, but the formal possibility that the miracle might, after all, have occurred does not really trouble him any more than a fear that water might not be H&O. Similarly, the Christian does not necessarily claim to have demonstrative proof, but the formal possibility that God might not exist is not necessarily present in the form of the least actual doubt. Of course, there are Christians who hold that such demonstrative proof exists, just as there may be materialists who hold that there is demonstrative disproof. But then, whichever of them is right, if either is, while he retained the proof or disproof, would be not believing or disbelieving, but knowing. We are speaking of belief and disbelief in the strongest degree, but not of knowledge. Belief in this sense seems to me to be assent to a proposition which we think so overwhelmingly probable that there is a psychological exclusion of doubt, though not a logical exclusion of dispute. It may be asked whether belief, and of course disbelief, of this sort ever attaches to any but theological propositions. I think that many beliefs approximate to it. That is, many probabilities seem to us so strong that the absence of logical certainty does not induce in us the least shade of doubt. The scientific beliefs of those who are not themselves scientists often have this character, especially among the uneducated. Most of our beliefs about other people are of the same sort. The scientist himself, or he who was a scientist in the laboratory, has beliefs about his wife and friends, which he holds, not indeed without evidence, but with more certitude than the evidence, if weighed in the laboratory manner, would justify. Most of my generation had a belief in the reality of the external world and of other people, if you prefer it, a disbelief in solipsism, far in excess of our strongest arguments. It may be true, as they now say, that the whole thing arose from category mistakes and was a pseudo-problem, but then we didn't know that in the 20s. Yet we managed to disbelieve in solipsism all the same. There is, of course, no question so far of belief without evidence. We must beware of confusion between the way in which a Christian first assents to certain propositions and the way in which he afterwards adheres to them. These must be carefully distinguished. Of the second, it is true, in a sense, to say that Christians do recommend a certain discounting of apparent contrary evidence, and I will later attempt to explain why. But so far as I know, it is not expected that a man should assent to these propositions in the first place without evidence, or in the teeth of the evidence. At any rate, if anyone expects that, I certainly do not. And in fact, the man who accepts Christianity always thinks he had good evidence, whether like Dante, physici e metaphysici, argumenti, or historical evidence, or the evidence of religious experience, or authority, or all these together. For of course, authority, however we may value it in this or that particular instance, is a kind of evidence. All of our historical beliefs, most of our geographical beliefs, many of our beliefs about matters that concern us in daily life, are accepted on the authority of other human beings, whether we are Christians, atheists, scientists, or men in the street. It is not the purpose of this essay to weigh the evidence of whatever kind on which Christians base their belief. To do that would be to write a full-dress apologia. All that I need do here is to point out that, at the very worst, this evidence cannot be so weak as to warrant the view that all whom it convinces are indifferent to evidence. The history of thought seems to make this quite plain. We know, in fact, that believers are not cut off from unbelievers by any portentous inferiority of intelligence or any perverse refusal to think. Many of them have been people of powerful minds. Many of them have been scientists. We may suppose them to have been mistaken, but we must suppose that their error was at least plausible. We might indeed conclude that it was merely from the multitude and diversity of the arguments against it. For there is not one case against religion, but many. Some say, like Capaneus in Statius, that it is a projection of our primitive fears. Primus in orbe Deus fecit timor. Others, with Euhemeros, that it is all a plant put up by wicked kings, priests, or capitalists. Others, with Tyler, that it comes from dreams about the dead. Others, with Fraser, that it is a byproduct of agriculture. Others, like Freud, that it is a complex. The moderns, that it is a category mistake. I will never believe that an error against which so many and various defensive weapons have been found necessary was, from the outset, wholly lacking in plausibility. All this post-haste and rummage in the land obviously implies a respectable enemy. There are, of course, people in our own day to whom the whole situation seems altered by the doctrine of the concealed wish. They will admit that men, otherwise apparently rational, have been deceived by the arguments for religion. But they will say that they have been deceived first by their own desires and produced the arguments afterwards as a rationalization. That these arguments have never been intrinsically even plausible, but have seemed so because they were secretly weighted by our wishes. Now, I do not doubt that this sort of thing happens in thinking about religion as in thinking about other things. But as a general explanation of religious assent, it seems to me quite useless. On that issue, our wishes may favor either side or both. The assumption that every man would be pleased, and nothing but pleased if only he could conclude that Christianity is true, appears to me to be simply preposterous. If Freud is right about the Oedipus complex, the universal pressure of the wish that God should not exist must be enormous, and atheism must be an admirable gratification to one of our strongest suppressed impulses. This argument, in fact, could be used on the theistic side, but I have no intention of so using it. It will not really help either party. It is fatally ambivalent. Men wish on both sides, and again there is fear, fulfillment, as well as wish fulfillment, and hypochondriac temperaments will always tend to think true what they most wish to be false. Thus, instead of the one predicament on which our opponents sometimes concentrate, there are in fact four. A man may be a Christian because he wants Christianity to be true. He may be an atheist because he wants atheism to be true. He may be an atheist because he wants Christianity to be true. He may be a Christian because he wants atheism to be true. Surely these possibilities cancel one another out. They may be of some use in analyzing a particular instance of belief or disbelief where we know the case history, but as a general explanation of either, they will not help us. I do not think they overthrow the view that there is evidence both for and against the Christian propositions which fully rational minds, working honestly, can assess differently. I therefore ask you to substitute a different and less tidy picture for that with which we began. In it, you remember, two different kinds of men, scientists, who proportioned their belief to the evidence, and Christians who did not, were left facing one another across a chasm. The picture I should prefer is like this. All men alike, on questions which interest them, escape from the region of belief into that of knowledge when they can, and if they succeed in knowing, they no longer say they believe. The questions in which mathematicians are interested admit of treatment by a particularly clear and a strict technique. Those of the scientist have their own technique, which is not quite the same. Those of the historian and the judge are different again. The mathematician's proof, at least so we laymen suppose, is by reasoning, the scientists by experiment, the historians by documents, the judges by concurring sworn testimony. But all these men, as men, on questions outside their own disciplines, have numerous beliefs to which they do not normally apply the methods of their own disciplines. It would indeed carry some suspicion of morbidity and even of insanity if they did. These beliefs vary in strength from weak opinion to complete subjective certitude. Specimens of such beliefs at their strongest are the Christians I believe and the convinced atheists I don't believe a word of it. The particular subject matter on which these two disagree does not, of course, necessarily involve such strength of belief and disbelief. There are some who moderately opine that there is or is not a God, but there are others whose belief or disbelief is free from doubt, and all these beliefs, weak or strong, are based on what appears to the holders to be evidence. But the strong believers or disbelievers, of course, think they have very strong evidence. There is no need to suppose stark unreason on either side. We need only suppose error. One side has estimated the evidence wrongly, and even so, the mistake cannot be supposed to be of a flagrant nature. Otherwise, the debate would not continue. So much, then, for the way in which Christians come to assent to certain propositions. But we have now to consider something quite different, their adherence to their belief after it has once been formed. It is here that the charge of irrationality and resistance to evidence becomes really important. For it must be admitted at once that Christians do praise such an adherence as if it were meritorious, and even in a sense more meritorious the stronger the apparent evidence against their faith becomes. They even warn one another that such apparent contrary evidence, such trials to faith or temptations to doubt, may be expected to occur, and determine in advance to resist them. And this is certainly shockingly unlike the behavior we all demand of the scientist or the historian in their own disciplines. There, to slur over or ignore the faintest evidence against a favorite hypothesis is admittedly foolish and shameful. It must be exposed to every test. Every doubt must be invited. But then I do not admit that a hypothesis is a belief. And if we consider the scientist not among his hypotheses in the laboratory, but among the beliefs in his ordinary life, I think the contrast between him and the Christian would be weakened. If, for the first time, a doubt of his wife's fidelity crosses the scientist's mind, does he consider it his duty at once to entertain this doubt with complete impartiality? At once, to evolve a series of experiments by which it can be tested and to await the result with pure neutrality of mind. No doubt it may come to that in the end. There are unfaithful wives. There are experimental husbands. But is such a course what his brother scientists would recommend to him? All of them, I suppose, except one. As the first step he should take, and the only one consistent with his honor as a scientist? Or would they, like us, blame him for a moral flaw rather than praise him for an intellectual virtue if he did so? This is intended, however, merely as a precaution against exaggerating the difference between Christian obstinacy in belief and the behavior of normal people about their non-theological beliefs. I am far from suggesting that the case I have supposed is exactly parallel to the Christian obstinacy. For of course evidence of the wife's infidelity might accumulate and presently reach a point at which the scientist would be pitiably foolish to disbelieve it. But the Christians seem to praise an adherence to the original belief which holds out against any evidence whatever. I must now try to show why such praise is in fact a logical conclusion from the original belief itself. This can be done best by thinking for a moment of situations in which the thing is reversed. In Christianity, such faith is demanded of us. But there are situations in which we demand it of others. There are times when we can do all that a fellow creature needs, if only he will trust us. In getting a dog out of a trap, in extracting a thorn from a child's finger, in teaching a boy to swim or rescuing one who can't, in getting a frightened beginner over a nasty place on a mountain. The one fatal obstacle may be their distrust. We are asking them to trust us in the teeth of their senses, their imagination, and their intelligence. We ask them to believe that what is painful will relieve their pain, and that what looks dangerous is their only safety. We ask them to accept apparent impossibility, that moving the paw farther back into the trap is the way to get it out, that hurting the finger very much more will stop the finger hurting, that water, which is obviously permeable, will resist and support the body, that holding on to the only support within reach is not the way to avoid sinking, that to go higher and onto a more exposed ledge is the way not to fall. To support all these incredibilia, we can rely only on the other party's confidence in us, a confidence certainly not based on demonstration, admittedly shot through with emotion, and perhaps if we are strangers, resting on nothing but such assurance as the look of our face and the tone of our voice can supplete, or even, for the dog, on our smell. Sometimes, because of their unbelief, we can do no mighty works. But if we succeed, we do so because they have maintained their faith in us against apparently contrary evidence. No one blames us for demanding such faith. No one blames them for giving it. No one says afterwards, "What an unintelligent dog or child or boy that must have been to trust us." If the young mountaineer were a scientist, it would not be held against him when he came up for a fellowship that he had once departed from Clifford's rule of evidence by entertaining a belief with strength greater than the evidence logically obliged him to. Now, to accept the Christian propositions is ipso facto to believe that we are to God, always, as that dog or child or brother or mountain climber was to us, only very much more so. From this, it is a strictly logical conclusion that the behavior which was appropriate to them will be appropriate to us, only very much more so. Mark, I am not saying that the strength of our original belief must by psychological necessity produce such behavior, I'm saying that the content of our original belief by logical necessity entails the proposition that such behavior is appropriate if human life is in fact ordered by a beneficent being whose knowledge of our real needs and of the way in which they can be satisfied infinitely exceeds our own. We must expect a priori that his operations will often appear to us far from beneficent and far from wise, and that it will be our highest prudence to give him our confidence in spite of this. This expectation is increased by the fact that when we accept Christianity, we are warned that apparent evidence against it will occur, evidence strong enough to deceive, if possible, the very elect. Our situation is rendered tolerable by two facts. One is that we seem to ourselves, besides the apparently contrary evidence, to receive favorable evidence. Some of it is in the form of external events, as when I go to see a man moved by what I felt to be a whim, and find he has been praying that I should come to him that day. Some of it is more like the evidence on which the mountaineer or the dog might trust his rescuer, the rescuer's voice, look, and smell. For it seems to us, though you, on your premises, must believe us deluded, that we have something like a knowledge by acquaintance of the person we believe in, however imperfect and intermittent it may be. We trust not because a God exists, but because this God exists. Or if we ourselves dare not claim to know him, Christendom does, and we trust at least some of its representatives in the same way because of the sort of people they are. The second fact is this: we think we can see already. Why? If our original belief is true, such trust beyond the evidence, against much apparent evidence, has to be demanded of us. For the question is not about being helped out of one trap or over one difficult place in a climb. We believe that his intention is to create a certain personal relation between himself and us, a relation really sui generis, but analogically describable in terms of filial or of erotic love. Complete trust is an ingredient in that relation. Such trust as could have no room to grow except where there is also room for doubt. To love involves trusting the beloved beyond the evidence, even against much evidence. No man is our friend who believes in our good intentions only when they are proved. No man is our friend who will not be very slow to accept evidence against them. Such confidence between one man and another is in fact almost universally praised as a moral beauty, not blamed as a logical error. And the suspicious man is blamed for a meanness of character, not admired for the excellence of his logic. There is, you see, no real parallel between Christian obstinacy in faith and the obstinacy of a bad scientist trying to preserve a hypothesis, although the evidence has turned against it. Unbelievers very pardonably get the impression that an adherence to our faith is like that, because they meet Christianity, if at all, mainly in apologetic works. And there, of course, the existence and beneficence of God must appear as a speculative question like any other. Indeed, it is a speculative question as long as it is a question at all. But once it has been answered in the affirmative, you get quite a new situation. To believe that God, at least this God, exists, is to believe that you as a person now stand in the presence of God as a person. What would, a moment before, have been variations in opinion, now become variations in your personal attitude to a person. You are no longer faced with an argument which demands your assent, but with a person who demands your confidence. A faint analogy would be this: it is one thing to ask in vacuo, whether so-and-so will join us tonight, and another to discuss this when so-and-so's honor is pledged to come, and some great matter depends on his coming. In the first case, it would be merely reasonable, as the clock ticked on, to expect him less and less. In the second, a continued expectation, far into the night, would be due to our friend's character, if we had found him reliable before. Which of us would not feel slightly ashamed if 1 moment after we had given him up, he arrived with a full explanation of his delay? We should feel that we ought to have known him better. Now, of course, we see, quite as clearly as you, how agonizingly two-edged all this is. A faith of this sort, if it happens to be true, is obviously what we need, and it's infinitely ruinous to lack it. But there can be faith of this sort, where it is wholly ungrounded. The dog may lick the face of the man who comes to take it out of the trap, but the man may only mean to vivisect it in South Park's Road when he has done so. The ducks who come to the call, "Dilly, dilly, come and be killed," have confidence in the farmer's wife, and she wrings their necks for their pains. There is that famous French story of the fire in the theater. Panic was spreading. The spectators were just turning from an audience into a mob. At that moment, a huge bearded man leaped through the orchestra onto the stage, raised his hand with a gesture full of nobility, and cried, "Que chacun regagne sa place." Such was the authority of his voice and bearing that everyone obeyed him. As a result, they were all burned to death, while the bearded man walked quietly out through the wings to the stage door, took a cab, which was waiting for someone else, and went home to bed. That demand for our confidence, which a true friend makes of us, is exactly the same that a confidence trickster would make. That refusal to trust, which is sensible in reply to a confidence trickster, is ungenerous and ignoble to a friend, and deeply damaging to our relation with him. To be forewarned and therefore forearmed against apparently contrary appearance is eminently rational if our belief is true. But if our belief is a delusion, this same forewarning and forearming would obviously be the method whereby the delusion rendered itself incurable. And yet again, to be aware of these possibilities and still to reject them is clearly the precise mode, and the only mode, in which our personal response to God can establish itself. In that sense, the ambiguity is not something that conflicts with faith so much as a condition which makes faith possible. When you are asked for trust, you may give it or withhold it. It is senseless to say that you will trust if you are given demonstrative certainty. There would be no room for trust if demonstration were given. When demonstration is given, what will be left will be simply the sort of relation which results from having trusted or not having trusted before it was given. The saying, "Blessed are those that have not seen and have believed," has nothing to do with our original assent to the Christian propositions. It was not addressed to a philosopher inquiring whether God exists. It was addressed to a man who already believed that, who already had long acquaintance with a particular person, and evidence that that person could do very odd things, and who then refused to believe one odd thing more, often predicted by that person, and vouched for by all his closest friends. It is a rebuke not to skepticism in the philosophic sense, but to the psychological quality of being suspicious. It says, in effect, "You should have known me better." There are cases between man and man where we should all, in our different way, bless those who have not seen and have believed. Our relation to those who trusted us only after we were proved innocent in court cannot be the same as our relation to those who trusted us all through. Our opponents, then, have a perfect right to dispute with us about the grounds of our original assent, but they must not accuse us of sheer insanity if, after the assent has been given, our adherence to it is no longer proportioned to every fluctuation of the apparent evidence. They cannot, of course, be expected to know on what our assurance feeds and how it revives and is always rising from its ashes. They cannot be expected to see how the quality of the object which we think we are beginning to know by acquaintance drives us to the view that if this were a delusion, then we should have to say that the universe had produced no real thing of comparable value, and that all explanations of the delusion seem somehow less important than the thing explained. That is knowledge we cannot communicate, but they can see how the assent of necessity moves us from the logic of speculative thought into what might perhaps be called the logic of personal relations. What would, up till then, have been variations simply of opinion become variations of conduct by a person to a person. Credere dem esse turns into credere in dem, and dem here is this God, the increasingly knowable Lord.
Isaiah 43:19 brings us a powerful message. In this passage, Isaiah conveys a revelation. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. It is important to understand that God is guiding us through the desert of life, regardless of the challenges we face. And he assures us something new is on its way for us. God is the architect of new beginnings and delights in inaugurating new things. Creation itself testifies to this. He designed our bodies to renew constantly with new cells and hair. We experience new days, years, and seasons. In Christ we are blessed with a new life, full of opportunities and challenges. One of the final promises in the Bible is the renewal of all things, Revelation 21:5. Even if you have gone through long periods of dryness, God is about to bring something new into your life. It may have been a hard path, but renewal is on its way. He promises, I will make a way in the wilderness for you. I know many feel isolated, rejected, and in distressing situations, but this path is the route to your purpose. According to Isaiah 43:19, he declares, Behold, I am doing a new thing. Made in the image of God, we too are drawn to the new. We are constantly seeking innovations, new experiences, and sensations. However, it is curious to observe that when God begins a transformation in our lives, our tendency is to resist. This is the rare occasion when we prefer the familiar to the unknown. I confess that I also resist changes, like many, because I have a specific vision for my life and resist anything that threatens to alter it. Therefore, when God introduces new things into my existence, my instinctive reaction is to resist and cling to the comfort of the known. It is unfolding at this very moment. Are you paying attention? God loves the new, for he is constantly seeking a fresh vessel to perform innovative works in a new era. God is not a replicator. He is an innovator. He does not seek to recreate what has been. He longs to inaugurate the unexplored. Take, for example, an episode from last year. God sealed a door, and despite my incessant pleas, chose not to reopen it. Instead of accepting and moving forward down the hallway towards the uncertain in search of a new passage he might have revealed, I stood in front of that old door, stubbornly insisting. However, I realize that it is essential to embrace the new things that God is orchestrating, to leave behind the missed chances and prepare for the new ones to come. I don't know about you, but I am ready for the new. Here is my question for you. What new thing is God trying to unveil in your life? What is this novelty that God is trying to unfold in your existence? What is this reality that you choose to ignore, but deep down you know that God has called you to a new purpose? What could it be? Some of you are sitting on a divinely inspired dream without giving it the attention it deserves. When God is in the process of creating something new, sometimes it is necessary to step into the territory of the unknown, which may seem uncomfortable, intimidating, and even unpleasant at first. We may be tempted to cling to the life we know, to the comfort of the familiar. However, it is necessary to leave the past behind, trust in God, and embrace what He is doing. Otherwise, we will deprive ourselves of all the wonders that God desires to operate in us and through us. Let me affirm, God is calling you to a new chapter, and it is time to overcome fear. Fear is the main adversary of the new. Fear is the tool Satan will use against you to obstruct your experience of divine magnificence. Fear has the power to paralyze, to make you retreat in the face of God's call, to prevent you from enjoying new graces. And it can prevent God from performing and manifesting the new in you and through you for the benefit of others. Consider the example of Abraham. God introduced a radical change in Abraham's life by instructing him to leave his homeland, his family, and everything familiar to venture into an unknown territory. Abraham chose to put his faith in God and renounce his previous way of life. As a result of his faithfulness, the nation of Israel was established, as well as the messianic lineage of Jesus. The disciples are also remarkable examples. Peter, John, and James left their lives as fishermen to follow Jesus and become his disciples. By accepting the novelty that God presented to them, they played fundamental roles in founding the church and guiding many to salvation. Satan often tries to intimidate us, to prevent us from becoming who God has called us to be. He whispers lies like, "You are too old, you are too young, you are not capable enough, you are not attractive enough, you are not worthy, you cannot do it, your faith is insufficient." He employs these strategies, and for many of us, fear manifests in different ways. Some fear failure. Satan delights in using fear. And what is my response to the adversary? In Christ all things are possible. It is not me, but Christ in me. However, when we decide to trust in God and embark on new beginnings, we must be prepared to face challenges. This is because new beginnings with God often come with periods of trial and preparation, since we are not always ready for the missions He assigns us. He molds and tests us until we are fit, and the desert is often His chosen training ground. Therefore, I may not be sufficient, but Jesus is. This is the message I have for you. Do not let fear prevent you from experiencing the new thing that God is bringing into your life. Do not let fear obstruct your path. Listen well. Begin what God has called you to. Take the first steps in what you were created for. Engage in what you were prepared for. Embark on what God has specially planned for you. Start now. 3 words that can transform your life. start now. There will never be the perfect moment or circumstance to begin the change you desire. David, the youngest of 8 brothers, seemed insignificant in the eyes of many. However, God had grand plans for him, anointing him as the future king of Israel. But David's coronation was not immediate. He faced a long period of trials and maturation, which lasted about 15 years before ascending to the throne. Like David, other biblical figures such as Moses, John the Baptist, and even Jesus went through phases of testing and refinement. After his baptism, Jesus withdrew to the desert, where he spent 40 days in intense reflection before beginning his ministry. Ecclesiastes, written by Solomon, offers us this wisdom. If you wait for perfect conditions, you will never do anything. How many times have we heard someone say, "When things calm down"? But the truth is that life rarely offers calm. It is a constant learning process to live amid chaos. Therefore, whatever you have planned, start now. Do not wait for the ideal moment. Seek the new that God is bringing. Embrace today's opportunities. Remember that God's mercy is renewed every morning. Look for this new mercy, not a repetition of the past, but a fresh start. When God freed the Israelites from slavery, he took them out of everything they knew and guided them to a new land. Before reaching the promised land, God led them through a longer path, intentionally, to strengthen and prepare them for what was to come. The desert was the stage for their trials and preparation, but they did not pass the test. They could not detach from the past. They longed for the good old days and wanted to return to Egypt. They did not endure hardships with patience. Instead, they complained and murmured. And finally, they did not trust in God and hesitated to enter the promised land. As a result, they were condemned to wander the desert for 40 years. When we face disappointments, when our dreams fail, it is easy to settle and believe that we have reached our limit. But God challenges us in Isaiah. "I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" God is about to inaugurate a new chapter in your life. He did not create us to remain stagnant. He has new opportunities, new relationships, and new blessings reserved for us. Do not let this be your story. I have acted like the Israelites myself, but I am learning to trust God and follow him, even if it means venturing beyond my comfort zone. I am striving to let go of my own plans and embrace his, for God's plans are infinitely superior to ours. If you feel that God is bringing something new into your life, do not resist like the Israelites, but embrace it with open arms. Leave the past behind and be ready for the tests and preparation that will come. If we trust him, he will elevate us to higher levels and perform wonders through us. Today marks the beginning of a renewed era. The chains that once limited you are dissolving. What imprisoned you is fading away. Obstacles may seem insurmountable. Perhaps you do not see the way to realize your dreams. You feel confined, as if you are imprisoned, limited by your surroundings. But God is proclaiming something new. I am inaugurating a new beginning. I am creating streams in the wasteland. I am turning barren ground into fertile fields. It is time to align with God. Yes, Lord, this resonates with me today. I accept this in my spirit. I am preparing for the new, Lord. Surprise me with your generosity. Transform this adversity. Manifest your magnificence in my existence. Maybe you will witness this novelty tomorrow. Perhaps you will achieve the breakthrough this week. You might get that scholarship this month. Maybe you will witness your healing, your breakthrough, your prosperity this year. When God promises something new, it means it will not be a repetition of the past. It will be something distinct. The new may surprise you. It may not unfold as you imagined. Stay open to how God will operate. Do not restrict him to a single possibility. Often, what we desire is just a shadow of what God has planned for us. God's plan for your life is grand and will exceed all expectations. Trust in the way he will lead things. If we cling too tightly to our own desires for how things should be, we risk not recognizing the new things God brings. Often, what God has reserved for us may surprise us, manifesting in unexpected ways, through unusual people, and in situations different from what we imagined. Perhaps at this very moment, God is moving in a new way in your life, and you have not yet noticed. He may be offering you a new opportunity, but you may hesitate to accept it. It does not correspond to your previous expectations. He is sending people your way who will bring heavenly connections, but they may not fit what you anticipated. Let go of your previous conceptions. The new that God brings may not resemble what you envisioned. Do not confine future possibilities to past experiences. God's greatest acts do not reside in the past, but await in the future. The question is, are you paying attention to this? Do you believe that God is operating new and extraordinary wonders? Or are you stuck in the past, in what has failed? Redirect your attention. Stop looking in the rearview mirror. Turn your eyes to the horizon. Anticipate divine generosity. Today is a new day. God is doing new works in your life. Works in your life. Works in your life.